Welcome to BreitWerks. So sometimes happy accidents happen. So on the 74, when we fired it up, it was spitting fuel out. This is the back, the part you can't see. And once we got the CIS box out, we saw that somebody spent some time keeping it together. So we are going to move all that stuff over to this new box. And luckily we got our mule engine here so that we can set the orientation of the runners. But all of this because this fuel line was cracked like that on an original cold start valve that has RTV instead of O-rings. That was attached to this flange, which I found the correlating hose down in one of the tins. And I was like, what in the heck? So anyway, we'll get that fixed up and we're gonna put it in one of these so we can go with the modern fuel lines and not have to do the crimp connector, at least on the feed side. So that is the plan. Gonna move all of this stuff over to here. And we will get that sorted and show you as we go along. So here's our first fun discovery. There's no gasket at all, it's just RTV. So it's supposed to have a cork gasket like that, but instead of that, it's just RTV, and I'm not sure it was really sticking that well. So wondering how well this car actually ran and drove, and why it was put away. We'll find out. We'll ask the owner. So while we were working on the CIS airbox, we also took the opportunity to do some stuff back here that would have been very difficult to do. So we put in a new breather hose here. That one was cracked and crispy. New evap line for the fuel carbon canister. New vacuum lines for the Sportomatic. This one's a 14 millimeter, these are 12s. Hardest part about that one was, well, getting it off on the other side, but putting the springs back in to the hose. I guess that guy has a tremendous amount of vacuum, so Porsche put springs in there. But yeah, this hose going from the vacuum module to the canister, from the vacuum module to the actual airbox, and then going down to the Sportomatic transmission. And we already showed you how we had cleaned up all the other stuff. But yeah, while you're in there, there's a couple little extra things you can get done and go from there. So we've got the CIS system all mocked up on this motor, ready to go back on the 74. So a couple of the changes that we were able to make. First of all, we had the original cold start valve, which the only downside to this cold start valve is it's a crimp connection, right? So we modernized that. Plus, it wasn't held in with any O-rings. It's all blue RTV, so somebody had made O-rings, which good on them for making that happen. However, the flange was the kind with a hole in it, and this didn't necessarily have that. What happened was, to do that, make that work, what they did was they had to block off a hose coming off of it. This hose weighs a ton because of this giant steel nut that they got in there. So clearly it cracked it off. And all of this stuff you couldn't see. This is the other one. This is the airbox plug that goes in the bottom. And when I took it out, I was like, what the heck? And then I cleaned it. So apparently this had some kind of a hole in it, and somebody welded it up to get rid of the hole. So fortunately, we were able to get one of those that's in pretty good shape. And then since these early ones do not have a auxiliary air valve to help with cold start, they have a micro switch that changes what's called a compensator. Well, the micro switch only has one tab. There's supposed to be two, so we were able to get a new micro switch. what I did like is that the guy had used 12 millimeter or curl, who knows, 12 millimeter nuts on the intake, which made it pretty easy to get it off. Unfortunately, one of those was lost, so we'll use a copper exhaust nut. Same 12 millimeter, makes it kind of easy to go. Now, because we're changing the cold start valve to the more modern design, we're going to have to put in an EV1 plug and replace the old connector. But here's the old air box. And you can see somebody had taken it apart, put it back together, glued it together. Unfortunately, a lot of the fasteners weren't in the holes. So had we gotten this thing to start, which almost would have been damn near impossible, we'd have had all kinds of problems. Plus, remember, this cold start valve, the hose going to it was cracked in a couple of places. So we probably wouldn't have gotten there. So if we come over here and we look at what we did, we reused pretty much everything off the old air box. The vacuum attachment plug, throttle body, everything's been cleaned up so that it now moves very nicely. There's the new micro switch with 2 tabs so we can actually connect it. And we had to adjust it so as soon as you touch the throttle, you can hear the click. So that goes over to your cold start valve, which we have updated to the more modern cold start valve. And the benefit of doing that was that we could put in the latest and greatest fuel line for the return, for the feed, which allowed us to have not crimped on connectors or crimped on hoses, but actually use the nuts and the ferrules and the crush washers. Plus, this guy here is not ported. That flange is not ported, so we don't have to hang anything off the bottom of that. That's the way it was designed. Now, on the feed line or the return line, there would have been a lot of changes that we would have had to make to go to the more modern return line. There's some features on this car or this injection system, 73.5, 74. They call it a 1 year only, but 73, 74 kind of setup. But unfortunately, the fuel head had been changed at some point. That was where our challenge started. That's what didn't make sense. These are supposed to be crimp connectors, but they're not, right? These are screw-ons. So what was happening was there were a lot of adaptations that were made to make the screw-on stuff work. So we had to stay with that on the feed line, but it's not going to be a huge problem. These are on there very nicely. We put a standoff here to kind of keep the joint there from wobbling around in the car, plus all new fuel hoses here. And then there's the famous, they call it the F connector, but it's actually more than an F. This guy here is our feed, right? Or I'm sorry, our return. So it comes off and it feeds the compensator, and it also comes off. And we had to update the warm-up regulator. The original warm-up regulator is not rebuildable, and it proved to not be working. So we've got a more modern warm-up regulator, we've got a more modern cold start valve, and more modern fuel lines. The good news about that is whoever was making it work over the last 40 years, good on them for doing that. But now we've kind of reset to zero, and replacement parts are still available. So should something happen, we should be able to support this thing for another 40 years. But that's where we are. We've got everything mocked up on our test engine here. So we're going to pick this guy up and move him over to the real engine that it's going to live on. And we'll come back with all that. But yeah, all these vacuum lines, everything was changed because they were all just crispy. And there was no way we were going to get a non-leaky air box. We also managed to be able to go in and change all the little boots, they call them, between the intake plenums and the actual air box. So all that stuff has now been updated. All right, we're gonna get on with it and we'll come back and show you what the final product looks like. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. CIS has been reinstalled on the 74 2.7. So we even did new fuel injector holders in both the inner and outer O-rings. So everything on this CIS system has been cleaned, restored, and put back together. We upgraded the warm-up regulator and the fuel feed line. Everything else is, oh, and the cold start valve. Everything else is original. So when we hit the throttle, we are expecting good stuff. But gotta get it started first, and nothing to it but to do it. So check back with us at BreitWerks.com and we'll keep you in the loop on how Project Persephone is going. 74 911S Sportomatic. Thanks for watching.